Okay, let's talk about something I see being talked about under my tanking guide called tanking anxiety. Or some people refer to it within imposter syndrome, but it's basically just generally being nervous or scared to tank pug groups as you push higher in Mythic Plus. This ultimately makes people not do it at all. Now, I think this will be different person to person, but the idea with tanking specific anxiety is that in Mythic Plus, the tank isn't just a role, but it's more so a leader, especially in pugs. You're expected to know how to play your class, do mechanics, know the route you'll be taking, which means you have to have already known the dungeon, and then when you start assigning people certain mechanics, in my experience, if the tank doesn't do it, no one does. A bit of important background before I move on. This season, I have pugged all of my score-giving keys, and I'm around 3,020 Mythic Plus score at the time of this video, which according to Raider.io, that's just about in the top 1.5 to 2% globally, which I feel is pretty good. I am trying to go for the 0.1% title, again, all pugging. If I do that, another video will come out, but otherwise, you won't ever hear me mention it again. So of the 100 keys I've pugged on this Demon Hunter that gave score, only 5 have depleted, giving me an over 95% success rate in timing score keys in full pugs. And I'm sure you all know that as the tank, typically you only have so much control over a key, especially if it's failing. I'm going to go over a few ways I think were big in getting this decent record and ways I overcame the anxiety of leading randoms. This is my first season doing this well pugging as tank. And if we're being honest, the reason I haven't done this much in past seasons is just because I kept getting in my own head. So while all the recent experiences are fresh, I thought I'd make a video on it. Also, I'll share a few realities that if you're new to the tank role, you may not know, but it will greatly help with any sort of impostering going on. So an unfortunate reality is that if you are very new to the game or new to Mythic Plus, you probably shouldn't be tanking. That being said, you can learn to tank without actually tanking. When you're playing as a DPS, observe what pulls your tank do that you like or don't like. Then in the future, when you start tanking, you can already have an idea of how you want to pull the dungeon. Lots of tank responsibilities can be learned by just observing other tanks. Even though I think that tank should not be your first role if you just start Mythic Plus, it's very reasonable to make it an early goal, regardless of what role you decide to start out as. But observing can only get you so far. My second point is that you need to know your class. And you can do this and should do this before you actually start getting into groups. Let me explain how. So no tank has a complex rotation, so at bare minimum, you need to know what buttons you're going to press to do DPS and what buttons you need to press to live. Tanking is also very feelsy craft, meaning you can do slightly, in quotes, wrong rotation. As long as it's giving you success and you're doing good damage or you're staying alive, it doesn't really matter. Now, DPS rotations for tanks is laughably easy. You can just go read a guide and hit a training dummy. The difficulty will really start when you're trying to figure out what buttons to press defensively. Now, I have a really easy strategy for learning this if you're new to a particular tank spec. Go into a Mythic 0 dungeon or burn your own keystone and go solo some pulls. You want to pick a difficulty that's appropriate for your gear level. As you can see here, I went in on an Atal Desar 25. You don't push your key, then go in, but like with whatever you have right now, whatever gear you're at right now, just go into something. Now, ideally pick a dungeon that has accessible trash pulls at the start. I think every single dungeon this season in the rotation has lots of trash at the start, so that should be no problem. In terms of Mythic Zeros in Dragonflight, Ruby Life Pools, or that one in Onaran Plains where you fly around, as well as even the underground, the Azure Vault, I think it's called. It's been so long. These are all really good dungeons just to get in if you're at like that 420, 430, 440 gear level. Run in without using any cooldowns longer than 30 seconds and see how long you live. Then add cooldowns, but none that are longer than a minute, and see how longer you live. Repeat this by adding more and more cooldowns, and that should give you an excellent idea of what you need to press. You can even go in and test with just this cooldown or this other cooldown. Like I can go in and not press anything besides Demon Spikes and live pretty long. But there are gaps in Demon Spike. After you go in with just Demon Spikes, you can identify, okay, in this gap is where I need to fell dev. If you're fell deving before and the pack is not even moving your HP, you don't need to overlap CDs. And this goes for every single tank. As Prop Paladin, you don't have to Ardent Defender, Guardian of Ancient Kings, and then rip everything and wog yourself. You don't have to do a lot of these things. Sometimes as Prop Paladin and Demon Hunter, a lot of your damage mitigation, especially against mobs, because most packs just melee you, right? So a lot of your damage mitigation on those classes specifically, and even Warrior, is just from blocking and parrying. Now, doing this in a dungeon solo gives you a situation where not everything will be kicked and interrupted, and you have to work hard to stop as many casts as possible in the pack. Now, this is a situation that will unfortunately happen a lot in pugs when people are panicked especially, but because you're doing this solo on your own time in your own dungeon, You get to basically experience the worst case scenario for tanking. This is like a failure situation where you're getting no help on any of the mobs and no incoming heals, without the pressure of letting the group down or having to deal with the full wipe. The more confident you can get at tank rotations and defensives, especially in this solo case, the more it will ease your anxiety when jumping into pug groups, as everything will feel easier, especially at a similar level, than trying to solo a dungeon. Now, the final note you can consider before you join a group as tank is to learn from the community. Tanks and healers have a unique disadvantage compared to DPS. When you're DPSing a keep, you are directly in competition with 2 other DPS via the damage meter. This keeps all 3 DPS in check and easily highlights when one person is above or below the average. Tanks and sorta healers don't really have this. As healer, at least you can see people dying a lot, but sometimes that has nothing to do with healer's misplay and more to do with mechanical failures. However, as tank, especially with a dungeon route, you can be making big mistakes, but you don't realize it until it's destroying the group. This tanking phenomenon is something I call the failure success valley. What this means in practice is that you do a dungeon a specific way as tank, it goes well, and 90% of the time when you do that dungeon, it goes well. However, as you climb in key levels or play with different comps, the dungeon's success rate starts to get worse. From the point of view of the tank, it was successful before, and they're not doing anything different, so it's not their fault. And this is what I mean by failure success valley. You did something that provided success, however, even when that thing is no longer good, in this case the route just doesn't scale well to higher keys, you keep doing it. But because you've had so much success in the past that you, like a river, has dug a valley, and even if there's a better way to go, you basically can't at this point. Now this is why, whether it be streamers, YouTube videos, or just browsing logs, watching other tanks is crucial, because in a dungeon, if you queue tank always, you lose any frame of reference without observing other people play. DPS are competing with each other, healers are competing with the DPS's ability to die, but tanks are kinda in this bubble, and I think this failure success valley, this is why a lot of tanks will have an ego, because even if they're the ones fucking up, they can't directly see that. Okay, you've considered all the prep. You learned your class rotation, seen other tanks fail and or do well, and generally now you have an idea of what you want to do when you're tanking a given dungeon. But now is where the real tankxiety steps in. You know what to do, but what if it's wrong? What if other people expect you to do different things and you don't do those things? Let's talk about how to handle these dilemmas inside dungeons. Firstly, as a tank, only do pulls, especially at the start of a key, where you can solo the core mechanics. Now there's a limit to this, so be reasonable. You don't literally have to move people out of bad mechanics or keep people alive, but I'm more so talking crowd control and interrupts. For example, as a demon hunter, in the first few pulls of a dungeon, I will go super aggressive with using my sigils. I'll silence the mobs, and I'll be constantly gripping and fearing to stop every single cast. During this time, I'll observe how much I'm overlapping with teammates. If you see a lot of other people using similar crowd control, you can reasonably expect that they will continue to play as they are throughout the key. Also, tracking interrupts with an add-on like Omni CD will give you a good idea of what to expect from your new pug group. If you see a lot of overlapping kicks, people are more likely to kick, but if you see a lot of kicks left on CD, even as mobs are casting, then know that maybe you should do smaller-ish pulls with less casters if you can't solo the kicks yourself. Now, I've also found that if players aren't interrupting at all, typing "please kick more" in chat doesn't really do anything beyond the next immediate pull. So yeah, good luck with that. Now, I've generally noticed that as you push higher in score and key level, people on average get better. So just remember, when you get a bad group, that the groups will, again, on average, only ever get better from there. Now, once you get your basic rotation and surviving down, which I can't stress how important this is because of how easy it is as tank, then you can worry about keeping your teammates alive. Example, if I go into a pull on my paladin, and I have done this pull before, I know that I can live without any major CDs. Then my mind no longer has to work out how to live. I can chill, do my rotation, and see what casts and mechanics I can help the team with. A lot of the times in a dungeon, and this is doubly true as you get better at playing your tank spec, you will not be the one dying. There are many 20 to 30 mob pulls I could do as DH or Paladin this season, and I live no problem. It's just that my party will be dying around me. Now moving on, keep in communication with your group. Now I don't mean getting into voice or anything crazy. Just make sure you have ping bound in-game, and ping corners when you're pulling back, or ping mobs when an affix or something that needs attention is happening. Don't overuse pings or really ever ping players. This will just make people ignore them, or it's likely to provoke reaction. Remember, pinging is sort of just like yelling and pointing. It's really up to the interpretation of everyone what your ping means. So try not to do super vague pings, because that might just start tilting people. Beyond pings, there's a strat I use called absolving myself of any responsibility. For example, in this dungeon, I want to pull a somewhat scary double pull next. I know I can live without any issue, but I want the healer to confirm that they're okay with it. So I will explicitly ask every single time if the healer is okay with this pull. If the pull goes bad, I am completely absolved from any blame for doubling the packs, because after I got the healer to confirm, it's now a collective decision, and thus no shot will anyone blame you, the tank, at all. This also works in reverse. If it's an expectation that you typically do a double pull and you don't want to do that, just keep your group informed. Like if you're ever uncertain about some pulls or you think you might die, or you're just nervous, just communicate to the group it's going to be a 2-mob pull, then a 6-mob pull. Just give them basic information. If anyone has to protest, they will do so then. But most of the time, if people see that you have a plan, they will just go along with it because in their head, they don't have a plan either. This also mitigates anyone flaming after the group wipes or after you die. This is also just kind of a real life tip. Getting ahead with clear communication is just a really good way to ensure things are smoother and you have less stress. MMO players have pretty bad social skills, so things are more likely to break down. However, no one can fault you if you told them what the plan was or you got someone else to agree that the plan was good. Remember, from the point of view of healers and DPS and pugs, 99 or maybe 89% of their tanks just aimlessly pull the dungeon, and they have no clue what's going on. The DPS have no clue what's going on. The healer has no clue what's going on. So if as a tank in a pug, you give them any amount of information so they have an idea of what's going on, it just, everyone's happier and having more fun. Now this goes both ways. If you ever die as a tank, and I don't know if you're watching this in a future season, but in Dragonflight Season 3, if you die first as tank, and it's not to like 3 very specific dispels, it is absolutely your fault. Assuming we're talking the mid to high key level, so not keys within the 0.1% title range, which is like 27, 28, 26 right now-ish. But if I die first within the group of my Demon Hunter, on any key, 24 or lower, it is my fault 100%. Again, it's not to a dispel, because there are dispels that if the healer ignores, you can just get deleted. But a tank dying first in a group is most likely the tank's fault. Now be reasonable with my statement here. Obviously, if someone body pulls a boss or drags random mobs from the dungeon into your pull, that's clearly not your fault. But even though I'm into the 23 to 25 key levels, I have gone full weeks without dying on both my DH and Paladin. Every single death I've had this entire season, when I watch it back, it's always been my own fault. Which, by the way, record your gameplay and rewatch it. You will learn a lot just by doing that. Or use a clipping rewind program like Shadowplay. I personally use SteelSeries Moments. And press the keybind every time you die. Pair this with a death recap add-on like Death Note so you can get a good idea of what exactly happened. If you're using Death Note, by the way, this add-on crashes a lot, so don't try to open it in combat. This is an after dungeon thing. If you do open it in the dungeon, don't mouse over anything in the middle. It might crash. Also, in Details Damage Meter, on the bottom right of my screen, I have a couple broadcaster tools turned on. This shows my last key presses, as well as anyone nearby using cooldowns, including myself. Paired with announcing deaths and announcing battle reses in the raid tools option, makes it really easy to get a grasp of what is happening and what abilities are being used when I'm rewatching the clips. I recommend turning all of these on as they have no performance impact from what I can tell, and you can put them on outer reaches of your screen because you don't need to look at them in the actual game, just in replays. I also don't think it'll really distract you. If anything, seeing that someone's died, seeing that someone's getting rezzed kind of keeps you informed. But most of the information being shown, especially on the broadcaster tools, is completely irrelevant when you're playing. Even if you stare at them, it's telling you what you pressed, so it's not like it's going to inform anything poorly. Now as tank, remember you are the actual group leader, even if you're not literally party leader. One of the biggest causes for key depletion and motivation deletion is when friction builds within a group and someone just leaves or intentionally throws. Remember, online video games are not a good medium to dissipate social frustration. Even if you do nothing wrong, someone else getting mad or getting ashamed then mad as a defense before leaving the group is still going to waste your time and possibly your keystone. So it's in your best interest that that doesn't happen. Now my personal thing is that I never leave the key first. Now I'll let the group mess up the same thing 2 times before I ask in chat about the timing chances or whether we want to finish with a deplete, drop the key and go lower, or just disband. Dragonflight Season 3 timers are very generous, so even keys with 20 to 25 deaths are still somewhat easily timable. Now earlier I said I would mention some realities that you may not be familiar with unless you've played all 3 roles or at least played a lot of tank. One of these realities is that people generally don't know when you, the tank, makes a mistake. I can remember 4 specific situations in the last week where I thought, oh god, I messed up, this might wipe the group. And sometimes it did wipe the group. But then when the group wiped, even though I said my B or that was on me or something like that, again, getting ahead with clear communication. Despite that, people will be like, no, it's not your fault. Tanks can't do anything about that or some shit. And I'll be like, oh, okay. If only they knew. People are just generally thankful that someone is playing tank. If you tried to queue as DPS or tried to find a tank for your random LFG key, you would probably understand why. There is and probably always will be a shortage of tanks, and the reason for that is the same reason that I even thought to make this video. There's a lot that comes with tanking, and in WoW and as a tank, you're basically paying $15 a month to let other people play the game. And those other people are really happy you're doing that. It's just important as tank to not be an asshole. So many tanks have absurdly big outgoing egos, or again, fall into that failure success valley, where in reality, tank rotations are piss easy outside of very, very high keys. You can't really die as tank unless you mess up. And if you take out the social factor, tanking is actually very simple at its core. It's really just the social things and also adapting pulls and how you play to having different classes in the group that makes it complicated. I see a lot of tanks being aggressive or toxic just because they think that they are doing everything right and everyone around them sucks, but I'd wager that if that tank were to be thrown into a 27 or 28 key right now, they'd be humbled real fast when they realize how many mistakes they were making that they were getting away with for so long. That about does it though. I know I didn't mention any magical methods for making nervousness or tanxiety go away. That's just because there isn't really a trick to it at all. It's kind of just about being prepared and understanding the possible things that could happen so you have less surprises. It's also especially about keeping an open mind, as there is a big difference in perspective between tank players and everyone else. The three roles at times play very different games, but it's important to remember Mythic Plus is a team game, and you're all working towards the same shared goal. That's all for now though. I'll be active in the comments as usual in case anyone has any questions. Later!